Jerry was stacking wood at sundown when a silver aerial disc appeared over some tall pine trees. Large, pale lights pulsed one after the other around the UFO, going in one direction and then reversing in a slow, steady pulse. There was no wind, but the tops of the pine trees whipped back and forth, as if the silver UFO was emitting some kind of energy, and we've all heard that. It can be a completely still day. And a disc comes, treetop, and the trees are doing this.
My family was at a hunting cabin in the boonies of PA at a friend's wedding reception. The cabin was situated in a small clearing in the forest. It was pitch black out, except for the bonfire. Suddenly, all the woodsy sounds stopped. No crickets, no birds, no bullfrogs. The adults were all drunk and carrying on, but we kids noticed immediately. The night was suddenly silent, except for the rustling of the treetops. I can't explain it, but something I couldn't readily identify was coming over the treetops into the clearing, and it was moving slow, and it was big. It was way too slow and way too low to be a plane. It had 3 lights at the back, and we could just make out a massive triangular shape. It was a black that made the night sky above seem lighter. It didn't make any noise at all, which freaked me out. I think there were 4 or 5 of us kids, and we had been playing a little ways away from the fire. Well, once we saw it, you better believe we hauled ass back to the adults, pointing to the sky and yelling. The adults thought we were just being dramatic, but when my mum looked up, she saw it. Then everyone saw it. It couldn't have been more than 100 feet above the treetops, and the treetops were moving like a tornado was coming through. But on the ground, it was really still. As we watched, it turned above the clearing, then blasted out of view without a sound. As soon as it was gone, the crickets started chirping again. My family had planned to stay the night at the cabin, but we didn't. I must have been 9 or 10 at the time, but I've never forgotten it or the way I felt seeing it. I had such a terrible feeling of dread in my stomach. I haven't ever felt fear like that since. The whole thing lasted maybe a few minutes, and my mum and I still talk about it sometimes. Scary stuff. A couple of years back, my family and I went on a 2-week camping trip. This place is high in the Uintas in Utah, and it takes a 7-mile dirt road to get to a tiny lake. My mother and her husband love to go up there, and they go often. Because of how secluded it is, there is usually no one up there. And when we went up there this time, there was only one other camper across the lake. It was my mum, her husband, his friend, my brother, and I. I had also brought my friend Kristen along. We brought 2 tent trailers, one bigger one with 2 king beds and a smaller one with 2 queens, which we spaced pretty far apart, so the adults could have their privacy and whatever. Of course, we got the smaller trailer. Well, the first couple of nights were uneventful, but then one night, after dinner, us kids hit the sack, while the adults were still up talking and listening to music. About 3 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a sonar-type sound. It was a pulsing sound that swept the area. It was pretty loud, so I looked around the tent to see if it had woken up my brother or Kristen. It hadn't. They were dead asleep. I laid there wide awake for at least an hour, and this sonar sound hadn't stopped. So I tried to nudge Kristen awake, and nothing. I was frightened, and so decided maybe to trek down to the parents' trailer to wake them up. I grabbed my cell phone, which had no service, a flashlight, and a tiny hatchet, and then left the trailer. I didn't look around because I was too afraid, so I looked down and walked as fast as I could to the other trailer. But as soon as I touched the door handle, the noise stopped. It was completely silent. No crickets, no birds, not a damn sound. I looked behind me, and there was a bright light above the trees, and my heart sank. The door was locked, so I started pounding and screaming. My mum's husband opened it and asked what was wrong as he let me in, and I told him everything. When we looked outside, the light was gone. He walked me back to the smaller trailer where my brother and friend were still sound asleep, and I laid there wide awake until the sun came up. The next 5 or so nights, I heard the same noise and basically didn't sleep. It woke no one else up. I haven't been up there since, but last year, my mum and her husband went up alone, and there wasn't even one other person up there, just those two. And about 3 of those Black Hawk helicopters started circling the area and came super close to them in the middle of the day. Scared the bejesus out of them. I was camping with my family, and the kids were in the tent already for some time before me and my wife decided to get some sleep. After I entered the tent, the kids woke up, and I turned around to look out of the tent and saw a faint, flickering light coming from a distance of 200 meters or so. It was night, and so I first thought it was somebody walking down the road with a flashlight, and that part of the road must be visible through the woods if you were carrying a flashlight. As it got closer, I was like, no, that is moving too quickly to be a person walking. So my brain thought it was possibly a person on a bicycle coming down the road that had a light attached to it. Again, as it got closer, I ruled that out too. And then it came close enough to see that it was a glowing, pulsating object around 1 to 1.5 meters in length and was completely silent. It was weaving through the trees at a height of about 3 to 5 meters with ease and pausing occasionally. At its closest, it was around 5 to 10 meters away from us and perfectly silent, and had a very interesting whitish blue pulsating glow. As my son was watching it, he asked what it was, and I told him I had no idea, but nothing I knew of could do that. The object finally started at an upward angle and glided silently upward until it was out of sight of my view from the tent. My guess is that this was some kind of probe, an unmanned object sent down from some other larger craft. I'd also like to add that I could not see any actual structure from where I was positioned. The shape was an elongated one. It was silent, with a bluish-white pulsating glow, and it was weaving through the dense forest with remarkable ease. This is my first sighting. A friend and I were walking east down Highway 57 from Gratiot County to Saginaw County in Michigan. This was about 1995, and it was late at night, and I believe it was fall. We saw a bright yellow light off to the northeast. It was bright enough to be a street light, but seeing we were in the rural countryside, we knew it wasn't a street light. As we walked further, we noticed that it was moving. Now we thought it was a low-flying helicopter, which was still unusual. At this point, I noticed that it's a sphere of light, and it's getting closer, and it's going to transit the highway. So we do, like any adventurous 16-year-old does, and run full speed towards the transit point. This whole time we were getting a really good look at this thing. It was bright yellow, no visible openings like windows or doors, etc. And it had a black ring that was attached at a 45-degree angle to the axis that the craft spins on, and so it makes the ring appear to wave as it spins. The whole thing was illuminated, even the black ring. It reminded me of the planet Saturn. At this point, we were close enough to shoot this thing with a 20 gauge. We were yelling at it, trying to catch its attention, running even closer. Then it started to cross the road at about treetop height as a car approached from behind us, heading west. Suddenly the car locks up their brakes, sliding onto the shoulder. I can see the people in the car looking up at the object in amazement. We start yelling to them, "Can you see it?" Then it happened. The object turned off its illumination. We were looking at this thing, still flying with its lights off, and with the full moon in the background, we could still make out the shape and the waving ring. Then, as if someone squished the object like modeling clay, it changed shape. Not really a recognizable shape. It kind of like flattened out. Then it started blinking red, white, and blue lights, like it disguised itself as a small plane. We looked over to the car, and the people just drove away, looking like nothing even happened. We yelled at them to stop, but they just stared straight ahead and drove off, without even looking at us. We just stood there on the side of the highway and watched the UFO fly off into the distance. Had we seen only its second shape, we would have thought it was just a plane.